On the morning of Saturday, November 5th, 1988, an 18-year-old girl named Lena Mercer stepped onto the gravel lot of the Dawson County machinery sale outside Lexington, Nebraska, and in less than 10 seconds, the yard made up its mind about her. Too young, too quiet, not a real buyer. She had heard that judgment before, sometimes out loud, more often written all over other people's faces. Lena was slight, with a braid tucked into the back of an oversized brown chore coat that had belonged to her father before the elbows wore shiny. She carried a spiral notebook, a flashlight, and a folded shop rag in her pocket. To most of the men around that ring, that made her look like somebody's kid tagging along for the day. What none of them understood yet was that she had come for one machine, and she knew more about it than any bidder there. If you've ever walked into a room and felt the room decide you did not matter before you opened your mouth, stay with me, because what happened next did not begin when Lena spoke. It began months earlier, in a drafty machine shed with a stack of old service binders and one very specific kind of attention. The Dawson County sale was a serious one that year. 4 estates had been folded into the same November consignment, which meant enough iron to pull in buyers from across central Nebraska and western Iowa. There were local farmers looking for winter projects, salvage men hunting margin, 2 dealership scouts, and the usual handful of men who showed up anywhere machinery might sell below what it was worth. Among the lots was a tractor almost everyone had already judged by reputation rather than fact. Lot 14, a 1971 Oliver 1855 diesel. No reserve, starts with assist, condition as seen. That was enough to make experienced buyers cautious. The Oliver 1855 had a name in farm country. On a good day, it was a strong, capable tractor. On a bad day, it was an expensive lesson. By 1988, plenty of buyers wanted nothing to do with a rough-looking 1855 unless they could steal it, and this one looked rough. The paint had gone past faded and into that tired, chalky green of machinery left outside too many seasons. The side panels were mismatched. One rear tire had weather cracks. The cab was gone. The seat vinyl had split open and curled at the edges. To most of the men previewing the line, it looked like exactly what the yard assumed it was: a risk. Marty Voss from Kearney Tractor Supply looked at it for maybe 4 minutes and walked away. A salvage buyer from Grand Island checked the rear end, kicked one tire, and muttered, "Engine gamble." 2 neighboring farmers agreed it might be worth something for parts if it sold cheap enough. Lena spent 42 minutes on it. She started where her grandfather had taught her to start. Not with what the machine wanted people to notice, but with what it would rather hide. She wiped grime off casting numbers, checked the mounting points, studied the adapter plate, looked at the fuel filter placement, then crawled low enough to inspect the underside of the bell housing. When she came back up, she had dirt on one sleeve, and certainty beginning to form in her face. Then she opened the battered toolbox under the platform. Inside was a rain-curled owner's manual, a plastic envelope, and a folded repair invoice browned at the edges. That was the moment the story changed. Lena Mercer had not learned old machinery by accident. Her grandfather, Warren Mercer, had farmed outside Cozad for 40 years and kept paper the way some men keep guns. Cleaned, organized, and close at hand. He had operator manuals, service bulletins, parts diagrams, dealer notes, and handwritten records of what failed, what lasted, and what men tended to believe without checking. He also had a rule: never buy the reputation of a machine, buy the truth of the machine in front of you. Lena had heard that line since she was 12. From 12 to 18, she spent winter Saturdays in Warren's heated shop office, sitting at a steel desk under a yellow lamp while the wind rattled the tin. Other people in her class went to games or the mall. Lena learned cereal breaks, common failures, and the strange afterlife of discontinued brands. She learned which tractors were bad, which tractors were only treated badly, and which tractors got called bad because most people were too lazy to separate one version from another. The Oliver 1855 was one of Warren's favorite examples. Most men think they know that tractor, he had told her the previous January. What they know is the story, not the updates, not the conversions, not the paperwork. The story. And the story was simple. A rough Oliver 1855 diesel could ruin you if the original Waukesha engine let go. But the truth, if you were patient enough to find it, could be very different. Lena had spent 9 months building a file on them. She copied notes from Warren's binders, requested old dealer bulletins through the community college library, called a retired mechanic in Holdridge who explained what a proper Perkins conversion looked like and where sloppy ones gave themselves away. So when she found that invoice in the toolbox at the Dawson County sale, she knew what it meant before anyone else in the yard had reason to care. The tractor in Lot 14 was not carrying its original Waukesha diesel. It had been converted in 1984 to a Perkins 354 by Sandhills Diesel in North Platte. The adapter work was documented. The clutch had been replaced at the same time. The over-under unit had been serviced 2 years later, and the injectors had been done the previous season. In other words, the part of the machine most buyers feared most was no longer the machine they thought they were bidding on. And nobody had noticed. Not the dealers, not the salvage men, not the auction office, nobody. Because nobody had looked where the truth was stored. This is the part that matters. Preparation is almost never dramatic while it is happening. It is usually quiet, paperwork, comparison, repetition, a person alone with information other people considered too boring to matter. That was what Lena had been doing for months, while the men who would later dismiss her were busy trusting what they already thought they knew. By late morning, the crowd thickened near the ring. The cold had lifted just enough to turn breath into faint steam instead of smoke. Men held coffee in paper cups and sale bills folded into back pockets. Lot 14 was not the headliner of the day. It was one of those middle lots that usually moved fast when the room thought it understood them. The auctioneer, Dean Holloway, called it at 11:18. Lot 14, Oliver 1855 diesel, sells as is, no reserve. We have assist on start. Who'll give me 2,000? Nothing. 1,800? A hand near the loader tires. Now 2? Silence. A salvage buyer bid 19. A neighboring farmer nodded 20. The salvage buyer came back at 21. That was about where the yard believed the machine belonged. Dean Holloway began his rhythm. 2,100, now 22, 21, 21, once. Lena raised her hand. Not a bidder card, just her hand. The auctioneer saw her and paused. Young lady, you bidding? Lena shook her head. I need to ask something first. A few men laughed. Not loudly. The low, dismissive kind of laugh people use when they are already sure the interruption will not matter. Dean glanced at the ringman, then back at Lena. Auctioneers know the difference between nuisance and tension. Something in the way she was standing made him choose tension. Go ahead. Lena looked not at the crowd, but at the tractor. Are you selling that as an original 1855 diesel? She asked. Or as a Perkins conversion tractor? The yard went still. Not politely still. Not waiting for the next bid still. still in the way people go still when the ground under the obvious suddenly shifts. Marty Voss turned his head. The salvage buyer frowned. One of the farmers said, "What?" Lena opened her notebook. "The original engine isn't in it," she said. "The conversion plate is there, the filter setup is wrong for the Waukesha, and the paperwork is in the toolbox under the platform. Sandhills Diesel did the conversion in March of '84. Clutch at the same time. Over-under service in '86. In September of last year." Nobody spoke. Then Marty Voss walked back to the tractor. He climbed the step, checked the toolbox, pulled out the plastic envelope, and unfolded the invoice. He read for maybe 20 seconds, then crouched to look where Lena had looked earlier. When he stood up again, the expression on his face was not embarrassment exactly. It was recalculation. "She's right," he said. There are moments when status leaves a room so quickly you can almost hear the vacuum it creates. A minute earlier, Lena Mercer had been an interruption. Now she was the single most important source of information at the sale. Dean Holloway lifted the microphone again. Even he sounded different. "All right, we are reopening this lot with new information. Oliver, 1855. Perkins conversion documented. I've got 2100. Who'll give me 22? Marty Voss lifted his card immediately. Now the bidding moved. 22, 24, 26, 28. A farmer from Gothenburg joined in, then a dealership scout, then Marty again. 3,000, 32, 34. The salvage buyer was out. The parts math no longer worked. The tractor sold for $3,600 to Marty Voss. More than 1,000 above where it would have gone if Lena had stayed quiet and let the yard believe its own lazy version of the truth. Only then did people start looking at her directly, not past her, not through her, at her. Marty stepped over after signing the ticket. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. Lena answered the way people answer when they are telling the truth and have no interest in dressing it up. "My grandfather kept the bulletins. I built a file on the 1855 after harvest." Marty looked at her notebook. "How long?" "Since February." He let out a short breath through his nose, half laugh, half respect. "That's more work than most buyers do with a checkbook in their pocket." Lena only shrugged. "I wanted to know what I was looking at." That line changed the yard more than the interruption itself, because that was the whole difference. She had wanted to know. They had wanted to assume. 2 days later, a white envelope showed up in the Mercer mailbox. Inside was a note from Marty Voss and 3 machine descriptions clipped from upcoming consignments. On the bottom he had written, "Tell me what these really are. I'll pay for your time." That was how it started. Not with a speech, not with a miracle, not with Lena somehow buying the tractor herself and driving it home in triumph. With paid work, real work, quiet work, the kind that comes after somebody competent watches you alter the price of a machine with nothing but preparation and a sentence. By the spring of 1989, 2 dealers and 1 banker had started calling Lena Mercer before estate sales whenever an oddball machine showed up in the listing. By the time she was 23, she was doing independent pre-sale inspections across 3 counties. By the time she opened Mercer Equipment Review in 1996, she had shelves of binders, a steel desk of her own, and the kind of reputation that makes people listen before they speak. Warren Mercer died in 1998. In his will, he left Lena the shop office and every manual in it. Taped inside the top drawer of the desk was a note in his handwriting. "Most people buy stories. Keep buying proof." She did. And years later, at another sale, another cold morning, another line of men around another machine they thought they understood, A young bidder asked Lena how she knew where to look when everyone else had already moved on. She told him the truth. "The room usually decides what you are before you say a word," she said. "That's fine. Let it decide. Then bring it something it can't argue with." That is what happened at Dawson County in November of 1988. A yard full of experience looked at an old tractor and saw risk. A girl in an oversized coat looked at the same machine and saw evidence. The yard trusted reputation. She trusted the record. And when the moment came, the months she had spent doing invisible work became louder than every assumption in the ring. That is the part worth remembering. Not that she embarrassed older men, not that she stopped an auction, that she changed the value of the room by knowing something true before anybody else bothered to find it.